Union leaders have warned the government that a religious discrimination bill must not allow faith-based schools to hire staff based on their faith. And it makes sense, right? I mean, if faith-based schools are permitted to go around hiring people on the basis of faith, they'll be faith-based. And that's a problem because, hang on, isn't the point of a faith-based school that the staff all share the same faith? Well, no, because according to union leaders, that would be discrimination against people of other faiths or of no faith at all. And trust me, no one understands discrimination on a job site better than union leaders. Try going on a union-controlled construction site as a contractor without union membership, and you'll find out just how well they understand discrimination. Federal Attorney General Mark Dreyfus has told faith leaders he's working on a religious discrimination bill that will be ready mid-year, though based on the tardiness of his department's work around convicted terrorists being freed from prison, we're not sure if he means middle of this year or middle of 2032. To be fair, religious leaders were promised a religious discrimination bill by Malcolm Turnbull as reassurance during the same-sex marriage debate that a change to the definition of marriage would not infringe upon religious practice. Same-sex marriage was legalised back in 2017. Religious people are still waiting for their promised protections. In the meantime, Archbishop of Hobart, Julian Porteous, spent 2 years and more than $500,000 defending himself before a tribunal for the crime of sharing Catholic doctrine on marriage with Catholic families whose children attended a Catholic school because they valued Catholic teaching. But all of that upset a transgender former Greens candidate who took exception. Well, we can't have that, except without a religious discrimination bill, we do. Let me give you another example. Essendon Football Club CEO Andrew Thorburn was forced out of his job for the crime of attending a church that held traditional views on gender and the sanctity of life. I could spend the rest of this program giving examples. Instead, I'll give you just one more. City Point Christian College in Brisbane was threatened with defunding and the principal forced to resign after they dared to ask parents enrolling their children in a Christian school to simply acknowledge on an enrolment contract that the school would teach a Christian view of sexuality and a biological view of gender. Well, the reaction was fierce. And then Queensland Education Minister Grace Grace, who has a non-binary child, well, she was irate. She thundered to media.
And no student should be denied a world-class education because they're a member of the LGBTIQ+ community, particularly my child.
Well, first, no child was being denied an education, world-class or otherwise. Like I said, parents were simply asked to acknowledge that they knew they were enrolling in a Christian school. And if parents still weren't happy, well, they only had a choice of 1,262 public schools. City Point Christian College was accused of trying to, and I quote, abusively heteronormalise children, by which critics I assume meant, teach the Bible. Imagine a Christian school using Christian teaching on sexuality and scientific fact on gender as a basis for their policies. Well, we can't have that, and increasingly, we can't. Because the moment religious people dare to exercise their freedom of speech, their freedom of association, or their freedom of conscience, they're caught in a spiderweb of state-based anti-discrimination laws that fail to recognise religious freedom as a fundamental right and instead regard it as a special exemption to be granted or removed according to the prejudices of their betters. Speaking of the government and the unions, but I repeat myself, Health Services Union National Secretary Lloyd Williams said his union would stand against any legislation that allowed an employer to preference hiring someone of faith. He told the Australian newspaper Today the Coalition's bill would have allowed discrimination towards workers of a particular faith and certainly people of a different sexual orientation. We would hope that this government, when it goes forward with any bill, will put protections in there for workers so they can't be discriminated against based on what religion they do or do not follow. And not to be outdone, CFMEU National Secretary Zack Smith also declared his union stood for the clear principle that no one should be discriminated against at work. Well, let me ask you this. Does a political party discriminate when it selects candidates whose beliefs are aligned with the party's? Of course not. They're exercising their right to select people who will maintain the ethos of their organisation. So why would the Labor Party or the unions, and again, I repeat myself, deny religious organisations the same basic right? Or are we saying the Labor Party can select candidates based on ethos, but religious schools shouldn't be allowed to select teachers based on ethos? Isn't that discrimination? The Labor Party prefer candidates based on gender to fulfil their gender quotas. But what, religious schools shouldn't be allowed to prefer teachers who believe in gender? Come on, Labor's energy policy makes more sense than this. And you know that's saying something. Do you ever get the feeling that the real agenda here is not ending discrimination, but ending Christian schooling? After all, if Christian schools are forced to employ people who don't agree with their Christian values, the school's entire reason for being is undermined, and parents wouldn't see any point in enrolling their children there at all. Eventually, religious schools would close down, leaving only public schools. If parents don't like the Christian stance on sexuality and gender, there are literally thousands of options available to them. But destroy the faith-based schooling system, and parents who don't like the state's stance on sexuality and gender will literally have no options available to them. Australia needs a bill to protect the rights of religious people to speak, assemble and believe as their faith dictates, not according to the dictates of the Labor Party or the unions. But again, I repeat myself.